ready to build resiliency, create a healthy lifestyle, and overcome adversity with a warrior mindset. This is Define the Fight with Mariah Prussia.
Hey, welcome everybody to this fine Monday morning, and I have an unbelievable woman who carries her heart literally on her sleeve, doing a lot of different things and acts of service throughout the community. You know, Sarah Dixon Hackey, she is an amazing woman. She currently serves as the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Liaison for Clay County Public Health, working to identify and bridge health gaps for underserved populations. In addition to her work with public health, she has also spent 18 years as a business instructor in higher education and 8 years in direct programming for at-risk populations in Fargo, North Dakota. But not only that, along with her professional work, she is deeply involved with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the North Dakota chapter, from 2014 to 2021. You know, she served as the walk chair for Fargo-Moorhead, the largest Out of the Darkness walk in the state. And in the fall of 2021, she was anointed State Field Ambassador, serving as a lead advocate in North Dakota for public policies supporting mental and behavioral health. She is approved trainer for the AFSP's More Than SAD suicide prevention training for parents and educators, and is a certified mental health first aid responder, a nationally recognized program by the National Council of and for Mental Health and Wellbeing. You know, Sarah, that just right there, your bio goes to show that you were put on this earth for a reason. We have spoken in the past, and mental health, as you and I both know, has significantly shifted, you know, so I want to thank you for being an advocate for mental health, because right now in current days and ages, we all need it. So thank you for coming on the show today.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for giving us space to really talk about these things. Always great to connect with you again.
You know, we spoke, gosh, how many years ago has it been since we had, was it probably 6 years ago? Let's not age ourselves, but it's been a while.
Yeah. And I always say anything before the pandemic, I feel like I've lost track of time, but it definitely was a couple of years. I would say like 2019, 2018 was probably the time frame. So it has been a bit.
Yeah, it has. Now for you, clearly when we look at mental health and we look at different people's journeys and why they dove into the area or the journey that they're now traveling, let's talk about why you feel that suicide prevention is near and dear to your heart.
Well, I think for me, it's a personal experience that really started a very, very long time ago. I didn't know that it was mental health at the time. I think I just thought I was really a nervous person, but it started as a young person. I think my journey with this, having clinical anxiety, what they consider generalized anxiety disorder. And I knew that I didn't feel, how should I say, comfortable with myself, but it wasn't until I think I got much later into my life that it really became an issue. And so when it came to just having this experience of even connecting to the AFSP, it was really just kind of meant to be. I, as far as the organization is concerned, I happened to go to a walk because of a colleague, a professional friend of mine at work had lost a sibling to suicide. And I went in support of that family member. I really wanted to be there for them and really kind of champion the cause. And what I realized at that time, that was several years ago, was how much of a community that space offered to people that were experiencing mental health challenges and survivors of suicide loss. And at that time, I wasn't really aware of my own, or I think ready to embrace my own kind of challenges, but it opened my eyes. And Mariah, I know you were at one of the walks, I think maybe it was right after we had kind of met. And when you meet that many people, I think it changes your perspective. And for me, it was very life-changing, and seeing just how rampant this epidemic, if you will, of mental health challenges are, not just in our community, but everywhere in the country.
Yeah, and I remember that day of going to the Out of the Dark, you know, the walk, and it was just the feel. It's hard to explain until you're there. You have individuals that you feel that come up and share their story that are more so towards the healing facet, where you have newbies, right? Where this is their first time. A lot of emotions are heightened, and they're in the very beginning of phase one of many phases when it comes to the grieving process. So how many years has the walk been established, Sarah?
Um, it's going on. I know they hit, I think it was 15 or 20 prior to the pandemic. Um, Quite frankly, the reason why it's even here in the first place is because of an amazing family, the Weiler family. And I always want to bring them up because I don't want that legacy to ever be forgotten. That is why we have this organization in our community. They were the ones that reached out and said, "We need this here. We've lost a family member, and we know that we're not alone in this. Other people are experiencing it too."
So with the Weiler family, what was their, clearly they lost somebody close to them. Was that a child that had passed? I remember hearing briefly on that story, but if you could
Yeah.
recap on that, it's been many years since I was at the walk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mary Weiler, she kind of got the loving name of the mom of the walk because she really took this under her wing. But she and her family, she lost a daughter and they lost a sister, essentially. And because they were such an incredibly close family, they took this on together. There's quite a few children, I believe 9 children altogether, and literally that group, that family, a small family, started the walk with, I think it was, they said maybe a couple hundred people the first year, and it was out in Lindenwood Park. I remember Mary telling that story and just saying we weren't sure how many people would show up, and then they just started to literally come out from the trees, coming and joining this event that they just hoped that people would be a part of. And now, I think they're topping 2,000 or more that physically are there, but many more that are also just contributing because this is something that people really want to support and make a difference in.
Well, and I think too, when we start looking at with suicide, it doesn't discriminate. And I think a lot of individuals think of, okay, you have to be in a certain spot in your life to be in a dark spot. And the reality is, it doesn't matter where you're at financially, relationship, so on and so forth. There's a lot of dark demons sometimes that sit inside, and individuals just don't know how or where to actively seek so that they can get that assistance. Now, for you, when we look at all of the different stories that you've come across, or stories, or maybe somebody who just came up to you and said, hey, I needed to hear that today. I'm sure you have a story or two that you want to share that was like, wow, I had no idea that this individual was struggling. And I'm so glad that we had this conversation today.
Well, absolutely. I think you think that you would get kind of used to it, right, over time. But I think every time I talk to somebody, I'm always taken aback by how deeply people are impacted, or maybe where they're struggling in their lives. And I think for me, one of the most poignant points was probably that first walk that I ever went to. And I wasn't sure what to expect. I remember it was at Lindenwood, and they had housed it at one of the larger shelters as kind of the starting point. And interestingly enough, it was kind of a light drizzle day. And so it had kind of this intense feeling to it. But all these people gathered and huddled under this shelter as we were waiting to kind of start it. And this gentleman could kind of tell that I wasn't really sure. Maybe I was new to it. And he was very kind. And he had these beads around his neck. And so if you've ever been to a walk, the beads really symbol the type of loss or mental health experience connection to the cause that you have. And so it really gives this kind of unspoken visual of just how deep and layered everybody's experience is. And his particular set of beads, he had multiple layers of them, I remember. And as I looked at the colors, because there's kind of a color chart, I saw the sheer volume of people that he lost in his life. And then as we were talking, I remember he specifically said he'd had this massive amount in his own family. I mean, it was more than 6 people in his immediate family that he'd lost to suicide over the years. And that level of, I think, just grief and trying to manage and understand really stuck with me. And yet the resilience that he was willing, he's like, I'm not going to give up. I know this has been something that our family has been really dealing with again and again, but we're here and we're going to keep fighting.
And that's what it's all about, is keep fighting. And, sharing that story, I know it's hard losing one person, but when you start adding multiple individuals into the mix, it becomes really defeating. And then you start questioning why. So when we look at problems, the key thing to also look at is, where are the solutions? How can we as individuals help not just adults, but our youth? And I'm looking at, like, depression rates are at like 29 to 30 some percent in the state of North Dakota for adults, which is crazy high. But then also looking at the fact that 3 people die by suicide every week. Sarah, you've got a lot of different stats, or clearly this is your wheelhouse. What are some other things that are really alarming that will really take people back to say, hey, we need to take this more serious?
Well, I think we certainly know that the numbers have been rising. I wasn't aware until I think the most recent release from the state of North Dakota. And I think one of the things that really kind of caught me by surprise was the sheer volume of how many people we've lost over just the last 4 years, if you will. And from 2019 specifically to 2022, there was a total of 724 North Dakotans that died by suicide. And when you think about, just kind of pause for a second, um, how many lives were impacted by that? We look at the rates, we know that certainly they're high, but understanding that from a larger perspective, if we go even further into kind of comparing it, if we want to say, okay, well, certainly we know that other states are experiencing this as well, but on average, um, we as a state have a rate that's been about 42% higher than the national average. So again, I think we need to understand that this is not something we want to be winning at, if you will. This is not an achievement that we certainly want to maintain. Um, I think if anything, we need to get, I think, very focused on it. And I want to be clear too, because I think, like you said, it's easy to get kind of really caught in the negative. And I think when we're looking at challenges, we also have to say, all right, what are the solutions, but also what are the good things that are happening, and how can we lift up and support and strengthen those things as well?
So when we look at the good things in regards to the different educational pieces, what are some of those different things that you are clearly working on, as with your team for the state, so on and so forth, that individuals are aware of within the community? Because we know that when it comes to health, when it comes to mental health, there are a lot of people out there actively serving, but the need is so much higher. So there's some individuals too that are falling through the cracks. So what does that look like for somebody who is trying to find a healthcare provider? And we look at whether it's financial means, or they just can't get in for a month, 3 months down the road. What are some different things that are available for their resources?
Absolutely. Well, one of the big things that we've been talking about for a while on the suicide prevention front is this release of the 988 crises, suicide and substance use crises hotline. And I'm always hesitant, because I know that's the formal title is crises, but we are extremely fortunate. We have an organization called First Link locally, known as a nonprofit, a small nonprofit that answers the calls for us in this state. In fact, they are based in Fargo. They have, I always say, a small but mighty team, and they are amazing. Because we have that central kind of organization answering the calls, it's not a number just for people that are in quote crises. One of the great things that we've talked about, and I talked about this with their community outreach director, Jeremy Brown, is that if you're struggling, if you're feeling overwhelmed, he even gave this great example. If you're watching the news and you're feeling, excessively anxious, or life is just really difficult for you, you can call that number and talk to somebody. Their crisis response operators are trained to really be there and to listen. And yes, they have resources for emergent kind of issues, but what I think most of the public doesn't realize is that, again, you don't have to be in crises per se. You can have, experiencing challenges that are just overwhelming. But they have this fantastic follow-up system. So if you're saying, I can't do it today. I'm just feeling overwhelmed and I'm feeling my heart's racing. I just need someone to talk to me, to support me. They will even ask you if you would like follow-up calls. So they can provide those follow-up calls to you for as long as you'd like and check in with you. And honestly, sometimes that's all we need. And I think, again, I've really been trying to ring that community bell of this is a resource that people need to know about, and that it's not just for the crises situations.
Well, I think it's great that you said that they're able to, I don't want to say vent, but release, right?
Yes.
And when it comes down to it, everybody has different types of support systems. And sometimes speaking with a complete stranger can feel like a safe place where it's like, okay, I want to talk about this. This is what I'm feeling. And then whether it's affirmation on how they're feeling, but then releasing that emotion. And I think we've all been in those spots where life gets heavy. Let's be honest. When we look at stress, what is stress? There's positive stress, there's negative stress, however you want to look at it, but it's stress. So it could be somebody's planning for a wedding, somebody's planning for, they just got a big promotion, but then there's different things that start coming into play, expectations and checklists. And then vice versa, whether it's somebody passing, losing a job, trying to put food on your table, there's so many different things, but it's like at the same point to know that there's resources that you don't have to hit that complete rock bottom spot where it's like, before I start going deeper into that hole, I want to make sure that I'm able to have somebody help me get out of that hole before it even gets started. So I think that's great that First Link is providing those different types of opportunities. When we look at, for you in regards to working with parents and educators, are you actively going into the schools right now too? Because youth, clearly, that has risen also when it comes to suicide rates.
That's a complicated question. There have been times when we've been requested, depending on the communities, and certainly we have to wait for the schools to really invite us in. But there have been times, certainly AFSP, we have different trainers that have gone into different systems and not only provided that to the students, but also to the teachers themselves. Because let's be honest, those teachers see those students every day. They have so much engagement and interaction with them. And we don't want to take for granted that, again, teachers have a full load of things to do. My husband is a K-12 instructor, and, looking at the amount of things that they have to fit into a day is overwhelming. And we want to make sure that they are armed with the right knowledge, the right tools to see the signs, and then to know where do we go next. So, that certainly is a piece, but along with, not just going into the schools, I think one thing that I don't know if it's as known, is that the state of North Dakota has been very purposefully working on increasing the amount of access to trainings that are out there. And so something that they've offered that I think is fantastic for anybody, it doesn't matter if you're in the healthcare system or not. I feel like every person should have this, is mental health first aid, kind of as a training for themselves, because we talk about the signs, we talk about changes that you should look for in, maybe even yourself, but also for those that you care about, your colleagues, your coworkers, certainly your family, your friends. And there is a whole series of trainings that they're offering right now in terms of offerings of that mental health first aid through the state of North Dakota that are entirely free, and they're virtual. So again, knowing that you don't even have to leave your house to receive these trainings, and they're cost effective.
Which is great when you're talking about educators, but then also other individuals, where you start looking at, if you own a business or employee, you're supervising, so on and so forth. It's not that it's labeled in regards to what your job title may or may not be. But I think what's also important is for not just the youth, right? When I was asking about going into the schools, who is actually taking care of the mental health of the teachers? So that is a big thing. Then also too, when we're going through COVID, I was really concerned in regards to counselors, because they're also overwhelmed, where they're taking on everybody's stuff. So it's getting hit from different angles. And then it's like you're trying to find that moment to breathe. So I think for individuals, that are currently struggling, is recognizing that too, everyone is struggling too. So it's like, if you're not able to get in on that day, that's a hard part. And that sounds horrible in the direction I'm meaning, I'm meaning in regards to the fact of sometimes it's not instant, and that's why those other lines of support are there until you're able to get in to see a counselor or a healthcare provider. So make sure that if you are in a rough spot right now, we're going to make sure throughout the show today that we're going to provide different tips and areas of support that you can actively seek. You look at the emotional well-being, the financial, but not only those different pieces of the puzzle, areas of support, different things that are available, which I did not realize that Sarah was sharing about the mental health first aid and the trainings that North Dakota provides. But now there is an upcoming legislation on 988. Sarah, I would love for you to dive into more, because the more that we're educated, the more that we are able to understand and help within the community. So do you want to share more about what that all stands for and what is coming into play?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think I really appreciate just this platform being able to talk about it, because it's something I've been just almost obsessed with over the last 4 years. But 988, as we know, for those of us that have been working in this industry, if you will, was something that really was brought into law in 2020. So it was signed into law during the pandemic. And what it gave us was this opportunity to have this 3-digit hotline. There was always a suicide prevention hotline prior to it, but it was long, it was arduous to try and recall. And those 3-digit numbers, when you're in crises specifically, is so important. And so by opening that doorway, we now had this national 3-digit number. And so locally, we certainly aligned ourselves with that. And we saw First Link changing the phone number to that. But that legislation didn't come along with funding. And so First Link is funded. Basically, a portion of it comes to the state, but then some of it is through nonprofit contracts, other things that they do. When I say that they are a small but mighty team, they're about 30 full-time and part-time employees that literally man these phones 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the entire state of North Dakota. Okay, so think about that. And when we look at the numbers, so you'd asked me before, well, what are some things that really just blew you away? When I met with Jeremy recently for 2023 alone, okay, so for 2023 alone, First Link fielded and de-escalated. So when I say de-escalated, I mean really kind of they didn't have to call emergency services, etc. But they were able to intervene and de-escalate 14,284 calls directly related to suicide.
Wow.
Okay, so I'll say that again. Yeah, 14,284 calls. And you can look at that, a couple of different ways. One, it's shocking when you think about just how rampant this issue is. But secondly, I look at it is how important that organization is to our community. Those are potentially lives that they were saving. We know that maybe some of them were repeat calls because they sometimes do have people that call back. But even if it was, 20%, 10% of those that were repeat calls, those are individuals and families that were affected by this.
Well, and to share the level of knowledge and compassion and, like you said, the ability to have de-escalation tools to talk people down into a place where now they're finding a little bit more resolve versus the outcome. That is huge. You look at the different numbers on that would be however many people for X amount of years, right? One a day for however many years. But the fact that they were able to utilize their sources and their knowledge, like you said, a small but mighty team, that's amazing and absolutely beautiful that the right people are clearly employed at First Link.
Absolutely. Well, and here's where it gets, I think, really dire and why I've been really trying to find a way to kind of bring this forward to the public. But so one of the things that North Dakota has that's unique is that we're one of only 4 states in the country that has legislative sessions every other year. So that means they only meet at the Capitol on every other odd number of years. So last time it was 2023. It'll be coming up in 2025. And in 2023, it was brought forward to the Behavioral Health and Services Committee that there was what's called a 988 user fee bill. And I want to be really clear, a user fee is not the same as a tax, meaning that everybody gets this, kind of amount assigned to them. We already have as users of phones, so only if you own a phone do you pay this small kind of amount, but we already have, it's around a 22 cent user fee that all of us as phone users pay. We don't even probably notice it on our bill for having 911. That is our service that we receive as, holders of that particular product, to that benefit. And so what this bill was suggesting was really assigning a very similar kind of 25, maybe 30 cent user fee to the phone service that would essentially fund the 988 services for our community. And it was really, I think, imperative to understand that we know that as people become more aware of this number 988, we hope that it will be utilized as much as they need it. But also we realize that our population in the state continues to grow. So it's this idea of being able to support the services that our community needs. What happened in 2023 was that it did not pass. It did not make it through the committee to go into implementation. They did have, I think, the foresight to do what they call an appropriation, which is a one-time dedication of dollars to help with the implementation of this service. But the problem with that is now FirstLink has to go back and kind of build their case again in 2025 and ask for that money again. And so, again, every time you bring that forward, that ask, there's that risk that the answer is going to be no, or won't be enough money. And we certainly don't want to see that happen. We know that need that we see in our community, we see it's growing. And so in 2025, one of the big things I'm asking people to really understand is that conversations need to happen with your community representatives and say, listen, I'm aware of what this is, and I want you to know that I support this. Because again, I think our representatives need to know that we do feel that this is a need. We have this desire, and that small amount of 25 cents, 35 cents, whatever it is, it's negligible when you look at the fact that we are literally losing people and that we have these astronomical numbers of people that need this service.
Yeah, 25 cents is what you're asking per call. That's really
Per
not
month.
per month. Is it
Per month.
per
Yeah,
month?
really. So it's even less than what we're thinking. So I mean, if you think about that, in today's society, to me, it's an astounding number that you're getting in terms of what you're getting in return.
100%. You can't put a price on somebody's life. You really can't. It's priceless. So whatever that looks like, and like you said, it's a very minute number. So 2025 is when it's going to be the big push, you guys, again, that is for the legislation, the 988 section. Is
Yep.
that what they're going to? Okay. Just wanted to clarify that they know exactly what they're looking for when it comes to the
Yes.
coverage of those components. Sarah, I want to shift a little bit here too. When we're talking about awareness, we're talking about calls and over 14,000 individuals that were saved. What are some of the signs? And I think that's probably some of the big questions. We think of, it's got to be a major sign. The reality is sometimes there aren't signs. And I have really close friends of mine that have lost loved ones that they just didn't see anything. And at that point, clearly it was too late. What are some of the things that individuals can actively look for, or behavioral patterns, so that they can start having active conversations?
Absolutely. It's hard because, certainly when I do the trainings, I hear that often, which is, I just didn't see it coming. I had no idea what I was even supposed to see. And so if we were to say like some of the most obvious things, so let's start with that first of all. Certainly, I always tell people it's anything that is in contradiction or contrary to what that person might normally do. So, you certainly hear the things like sleeping too little or sleeping, too much, changes in their eating habits, or if they seem more agitated or upset or focused or fixated on things than they normally would be. And so again, I always say you have to think that for some people, maybe that's their steady state always, right? So for someone like me who tends to have generalized anxiety disorder, I tend to always be fairly anxious. But a shift for me might look like if I suddenly start to shut down and get very quiet, and I'm no longer really expressing my anxieties, which would be very contrary to what my normal behavior would be. A lot of times, what we find is that it's not as dramatic or drastic as sometimes we think it will be. So it might be minor kind of changes. And I think the most difficult thing that people find is that because of the world that we live in, because of the virtual kind of spaces that we exist in, sometimes those signs don't show up in those one-on-one conversations. We do find more and more that sometimes individuals are maybe searching for things online that they're seeing or that they're expressing or they're sharing with others. Classic example, I remember a friend of mine started posting things that just seemed darker. They seemed more hopeless. But when I was sitting and having discussions with them at coffee, they seemed fine. Everything was great. But there were those subtle other things where it just felt like something was not being talked about, and there was deeper things underneath the surface. So I always say, be aware that not everything is things that you might engage in, quote, in the real world. We have to pay attention to what are those messages that they're putting out. And sometimes it's even the little things that when you're having a conversation or a text message, they're like, well, I don't know. It just seems like there's no point anymore. Right? A simple phrase, but that's it. And then they move on to something, but everything else is great. Pay attention to those small moments that seem like, well, that's a strange thing to say. And don't be afraid to ask, what was meant by that? Or what are you saying when you kind of say those things? Because I think a lot of times our lives are at this frenetic pace and we move so quickly that the signs themselves might be just a flicker, a moment. And we have to kind of just take a pause and say, okay, well, wait a minute. What did you just say? Because I need to know where that's coming from.
Well, that's the art of listening too. I think so many times you talk about distractions and cell phone and so on and so forth. Sometimes people are already in their next thought and they're not truly listening to the individual they're having a conversation with. So when we talk about you spoke about different signs. I also want individuals to understand that even the strong ones, okay, not saying that other individuals aren't strong, but there's individuals too that are always having their light on. Just because you may not hear signs does not mean that they don't need something, right? So different levels of support. So just keep that in mind. Don't be afraid to ask questions to your friends. Ask how they're doing, if there's different things that you can assist with. Because at the end of the day, we all need love, we all need hope, and we all need a little light to elevate our day. So Sarah and I spoke briefly about different signs when you're looking at suicide. However, there are a lot of different things that may go unrecognized. So keep that in mind. So if you have a loved one that has passed and you didn't see the signs, please make sure that you're releasing the guilt from that, because you don't need to hang on to an anchor. The whole goal is to make sure that you start step by step with healing through the grieving process. And that's really what life is all about, knowing that your loved one is clearly somebody who is also watching over you. Now, Sarah, we spoke briefly about different areas of support, but before we go into new ways, or not necessarily new ways, but more resources, I want to talk briefly about your podcast on Spotify, Building the Raft While Drowning. Can you lead us into the details? Because you know what? Sometimes we all feel like we're on a raft and it's drowning. We're trying not to allow it to sink. What does that look like, or what does it all entail?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it was funny because that name came to me actually mid-pandemic, because I felt like that's where we were all at the time. But it also, I think the focus for me was really in capturing or encapsulating this idea that for a lot of people, mental health, when we talk about it, and especially in challenges or crises, it can feel like we are just drowning, like life is just ahead of us. And when we look at our state, we obviously know that there's a lot of issues going on. We need to work on. We need to continue improving on, and there's no clear beginning or end to it. And so we just have to do the work as it is. And I think for people, a lot of times who want to know more about what's happening with the behavioral health services in our state, it's really complicated. Let's be honest. Even people working in the field, it's complicated. But the podcast itself, I wanted to offer a space for people that are working in the trenches, that are behavioral health experts themselves or advocates, and really talk about what's going on. What does it look like as a worker? What are the services that are being offered that maybe people don't know about? What's the work being done to better our system as a whole so that we can kind of really support and uplift that. And also, where are the gaps so that when those legislative years do happen, that we as community members, as stakeholders, can reach out and say, hey, listen, these things are happening, and I don't know if you realize it, but we really want you to do something about this. And so, I think one thing that I would tell anybody if they were to listen to that podcast is that every single person has the power to be a mental health advocate. And it's really just, I think advocate is a great term that can be translated to an educator, an awareness giver. And so that's our job. I always say it's our right and it's our responsibility to keep our legislators informed on what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, because far too often, too, when you look at in regards to political offices, they're focused on different things that are like the running pace, right? Go, 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 go. But the reality is you don't know what you don't know until you get into the trenches. And that is a fact. And sometimes it's this humbling moment where you're like, okay, you might see this on media. This is not necessarily the true image. Come and visit. We'll show you what it actually looks like. And I think that's with anything in life is we are being hit with different things and different phases of media that's like, this is what it is. And when I look at something that I see online, it's like, okay, I need to talk to somebody who's actually there. Is this fact or is this fiction? So I think it's great that you said it's like, be an advocate within your community, become an educator. It's a great transition into that. And we all need to be in that spot because when we are all light workers, that's when things really start to change. For other areas of resources, so make sure that you guys go in and you check out Building the Raft While Drowning on Spotify. Sarah, like I said, is an unbelievable individual, but then too, she's linking arms with experts within mental health. That's really what it's all about. So what are some other areas too that people can seek out when they are in need or even before they're in need so they can share with a friend?
Absolutely. I think that's the key, right? We want to be preventive as much as possible. So I know obviously, we're one of those border cities. And so for those of you who might be living on the Minnesota side or who have friends or family that live on the Minnesota side, there is this amazing organization. It's called Wellness in the Woods. Again, it's not for crises per se. It's really for day-to-day, I'm feeling overwhelmed or challenged. And it's for both mental health and substance use. And I think, one of the unique things about it is they call it a peer support connection warm line. So the number is 1-844 739 6369. Again, that number is 1-844 739 6369. And what's incredible about it is that they actually run in the evening hours, which I think is, as someone who has struggled, oftentimes that's when things kind of start to, the world kind of closes in on you. And I think that's when you need people the most. And so their availability is that they run 7 days a week from 5 p.m. to 9 a.m. and 365 days a year. And these individuals are all certified peer support trainers and support specialists, people that have had lived experience is what we consider them, that understand the road that you've been on, but also have found, hope and are succeeding. And so again, it's really about finding people that understand where you're at.
Awesome. And that sounds amazing too, because what most people don't recognize is nature is one of the most healing sources that we tend to bypass. We get into the screen, we get into our home, we isolate. And the reality is get outside, take a deep breath, look at your surroundings. We've had beautiful days surrounding us with the heat, with the sun. Granted, it's going to be 80s, 90s, whatever. We're going to take it in September. But vitamin D and the feel of the sun on your skin, on your face is unbelievable. Get around water. When we start looking at the different elements, whether it's the wind, fire, water, whatever, earth, whatever that may be, is learning how to ground yourself. And I think there's different coping mechanisms. Breath work, if you have not tapped into breath work, 100% dive into those different pieces of the puzzle because our breath is everything. It really sources clearly our body besides clearly water. But there's small different implements of change that aren't overwhelming. So literally one step at a time on creating healthier habits to move you forward in life. Now, you had also sent me some different links too, Sarah, you had said the Wellness in the Woods. You have the state of North Dakota suicide prevention resources. The mental health first aid training is also available for individuals. Now, when we have the playback, I'll make sure that I post these in the status so that you guys can see those and click on those directly. But most importantly, Sarah, I just want to thank you for being you, looking at your journey and how that you can help assist and aid in the health and well-being of other individuals, not only within our community, but the lives that you touch and meet every single day. So thank you for joining us on Define the Fight.
Thank you so much, Mariah.
If you guys are looking to help youth, make sure you check out definethefight.org. We have a variety of different components, and one piece of the puzzle is teaching youth coping strategies through meditation and mindset. So we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a great week. We'll see you next week on Define the Fight.